Well, the Columbus Dispatch said that I'm here to make you cry. Not really. This is a story of hope and healing and how one finds their voice. But what we're really going to talk about is human trafficking. And I'm going to tell you a secret in this time, too. The secret is that most of you don't know that this is a silent epidemic among our American youth. And the secret also is that I didn't know. I didn't know what happened to me all those years ago was called human trafficking. When we think of human trafficking, we get an image in our mind. We know that human trafficking is the cocoa fields. We know that it's Indian boys being sold by their parents for a debt they own to make bricks and carpets. We know human trafficking involves plantations and field workers working for no pay. We know that it's Cambodian girls and Thailand girls working as sex slaves in Asian brothels for tourists that come over. We know this, but we don't know that it's somebody like me. We don't think that human trafficking can happen to a kid that grew up in a home and in a town just like New Albany or Dublin. This is a picture of my first communion. I'm sure many of you have a picture similar to this. Do you remember doing your hair in rollers and sleeping in them? And if my brothers knew I had this picture, they'd probably be pretty mad. Those outfits are god ugly. But it's just to show you that I came from a normal family. I had a mom and a dad. I wasn't beaten. I didn't do drugs. I wasn't a runaway. I wasn't promiscuous. I was a good kid. And I grew up in nice houses. My dad was an engineer for General Electric, and he got promoted, and we moved every 2 years like clockwork. So I was always the new kid. I didn't have aunts and uncles and grandparents that were in town that I could talk to. I didn't have teachers and friends that would say, oh, you know, Teresa's acting a little different. So here I am, 15 years old, and we just moved to this little town called Birmingham, Michigan. And I thought it was an amazing town. And I eventually got a crush on this boy, and he was different. He wasn't like the regular boys that I went to school with. The normal boys I went to school with wore jeans and flannel shirts, and they took a week off in the fall to go hunting with their dads. Sound familiar? He wasn't like that. He wore slacks to school every day that were pressed with the line down the middle. He wore Ralph Lauren shirts. He had gold chains, and he smelled really good. I wasn't used to this. Now, my friends noticed him spending a lot of time talking to me, always around when I turned. And they said, you know what, if you want to be friends with us, you won't talk to him. And my parents were really strict, and they didn't let me date until I was 16. And they said, you're not going to go out with him. So one day, I was going home after school, stopped by my locker, and he's standing there right by my locker. And I thought, And he said, do you want to ride home from school? Now here I am, 15, I have a crush on him, and I'm not allowed to like him. What do you think I said? Heck yeah. I was like, all right, now this is not a date, right? Just so we clarify, this is not a date. He's just taking me home. So we go out to his car, and he has a brand new black Trans Am. Does anybody remember those? Great. So I'm all excited, and we get in this car, and we pull out the wrong way out of the parking lot. I live to the left, and he pulled out to the right. And I said, wait, I live this way. And he said, I know, but I just need to go home and grab something. Now, red flags went off on my head. My parents had had lots of talks with me. But then I thought, Theresa, you're being silly. You know him. You go to church with him. I thought everything would be okay. So we went to his house, and if you think my house looked big, it was a shack compared to his, and I was curious. And he said, do you want to come in? I just need to grab something. Now, more red flags went off, and I said all the right things. I said, no, my mom is waiting for me. I need to get home. But he turned to me, and he said 3 words. It only took 3 words. He said, I like you. That's all it took. I ignored all those red flags that day, and I thought everything would be okay, but it wasn't, because all those red flags were right. What he did is very common even today. He showed me around, he offered me a pop, and unfortunately that pop was laced with something, and I did not know that. I became very dizzy, and he proceeded to rape me. Now, when I went home that afternoon, I didn't rush and tell my mom. You see, my family was Catholic, and we really valued virginity until you got married. As much as family, I valued it. And I didn't want them to know that that was no longer the case. I didn't want them to see me different. And you see, like many parents, we don't want our children to go through the same mistakes that we made. My mom got pregnant out of wedlock and had to get married, and she wasn't happy about it. So she used this technique that some parents use, that tough love, and she said, Theresa, if you ever have sex, you're going to get pregnant and then you're out, to kind of scare me to be straight, right? I believed her. So here I am coming home thinking, wow, I just had sex, I'm gonna be kicked out. I disobeyed them, I went with him, and I don't want them to think of me different. So I didn't say anything. I thought I'll just handle this on my own. But it got worse, because a couple days later, he came to me, and he had an envelope in his hands. And in that envelope were pictures. And he said, my cousins were there taking pictures, and they have a plan. And that plan is that you're going to earn these back or else. He said, we know where your dad works. We know where he lives. We're going to show them to your dad's boss, take them to his house. We're going to post them around school. Now, I was new there. I was trying to make friends. I figured my dad would get fired. And he said, we're going to show them to the priest at church, where I was really involved in. So to me, I thought I had no other options, no other alternatives, and I still had no idea what earn them back meant. What it meant was they would kill my brothers if I didn't do what I said. They would hurt my parents. They would call my room in the middle of the night and demand that I appear immediately for service. Now, I didn't put risque clothing on or do my hair or my makeup. I usually went in my pajamas, and I usually went barefoot so I could sneak out quietly. I would sneak out to another street in our subdivision where that Trans Am was waiting for me. And I didn't walk the streets and knock on car doors. I was taken to very beautiful upscale homes where they would usher me in these side doors, down the stairs, to these opulent areas where only men were allowed. There was always a bedroom, and I would be taken and locked away, sometimes tied up, sometimes tortured. And I was thinking the other day, wow, there was families upstairs, women and children. They must have heard my screams. This went on for 2 long years. I remember one night laying there, totally exhausted, just wanting to go home so I could get a few hours of sleep before I went to school the next day. And I remember laying there, and the door opened again. And I looked up, and it was my trafficker with an older gentleman. And he said something to me that nobody had ever said. He said, "What's your name?" Nobody ever asked me that. And I knew from experience I wasn't allowed to speak. I had done that one time. So I kept my eyes down, and I didn't look up. And he looked at the trafficker and said, "What's her name?" And the trafficker looked at him with disgust and said, "What does it matter? She has no name." Now to hear that, as a kid, as an adult, it breaks your soul. These guys were ruthless. But this man didn't know. He didn't know that I wasn't there by choice. He didn't know that I was only 16 years old. He had no idea. So how big of a problem is this? Well, we know that 80% of victims are women, and 50% are children. The University of Pennsylvania has found that 350,000 American youth are at risk of being sexually exploited. That's a lot of kids. The FBI and National Missing Children's Clearinghouse have said that 100,000 American kids are being sexually trafficked right this very minute. Can you believe that? And I sit on the Attorney General's commission here in Ohio to study human trafficking. And before we were able to pass the bill into law, they wanted to know how big of a problem was this in Ohio, in our communities right here. And the University of Toledo found that over 1,079 kids are being trafficked in Ohio, your kids, right this very minute. But how many is too many? How many Theresas are too many? Is one? I love this quote. It says, "I never met a juvenile in prostitution who didn't have a pimp." You see, in our country, human trafficking is different. It's not the plantations and the brick workers and the brothels. It's called teen prostitution here. It comes in a different form, and we don't know it. Because in our country, we think of prostitution as an option, something people choose to do. We don't know that the average woman has to have sex with 10 to 15 men a night, every night of the year. We don't know that she has a 40% higher chance of dying than any of you. Most likely she will die of murder, drug overdose, or suicide because it's so hard to take. She will become involved in the legal system, the medical system, the social service system, and without a doubt, she will lose her voice. I get the opportunity to work for an amazing organization called Grace Haven. This is a home that we are building outside of Columbus that will house 10 kids under the age of 18 who've been victimized by human trafficking. Most of them can't go back home. They don't have good families. They've been runaways, and they have no other option. Our home will allow them to get their GED. It'll allow them to heal, to get therapy, to play, to be a kid again. Because most of these kids have had to do very adult things that most of you have never had to do. They have post-traumatic stress and Stockholm syndrome. It's like being in a cult. So it takes years and years to heal from something like this. And Grace Haven is going to do that. The other thing that I get to do with Grace Haven is I get to work with survivors, and I get to tell my story all over the place. So one night, I was speaking to a young lady who is 20 years old. She's from Ohio, and she was sold by her mom when she was 4 years old. She was having a very difficult time, not getting counseling, and I was taking bets that she wasn't going to make it through the weekend. I went to Detroit that day to do a talk, and it was the first time I had gone back to Detroit. I wasn't happy about it, and I was driving home afterwards, and something happened. I got lost. I started seeing signs for the names of the cities I had been taken to before, and I started to freak out. I remembered my worst night ever. I remember the night when I went out to meet that Trans Am, and it was a different driver. They kidnapped me, and they drove me very far away from home. They drugged me and beat me. When we stopped, we arrived at a little dingy diner motel in the inner city Detroit, the kind that's the L-shaped kind with the doors on the outside and the broken down cars, and there's always like a 24-hour diner on the end. I had never been to a place like that. They pulled me by my hair from the car to a little open motel room that was open, and 20 men waited for me. Here I was, the only girl, 16, in a sea of men. And that night, I was auctioned off to the highest bidder, over and over again until I passed out. When I woke up, I was naked and bleeding. I couldn't find my clothes. I didn't have any shoes. I didn't have any money. I didn't have any ID, and I had no idea where I was. Talk about total despair. So when I'm remembering this night, I'm remembering I really could have used somebody to talk to. I needed somebody, but I didn't have anybody because nobody knew this was going on to a kid like me. And I was remembering Sophie, and I thought, what can I do to reach out to these kids? I can share my story all the time, but what can I do to reach them? And I decided, we have this wonderful 1-800 number now. It's a toll-free hotline, a human trafficking hotline. I'm gonna get that to them in their darkest moment. And that darkest moment is in those motels. But they all go to the bathroom to clean up afterwards. And I thought, I'm going to put that 1-800 number on a tiny bar of soap for them to find, because they need someone to call. So at that moment, soap was created. And I thought, God, I really don't need another thing to do. I'm really busy. What should I call this? If I'm going to do this, what should I call it? And all the time I'm trying to drive out of Detroit. And I hear in my head, soap. Like, that's cute, God, that's cute. Well, what does SOAP stand for? And like this pops into my head, save our adolescents from prostitution. I thought, okay, this is it. I'm going to create this SOAP. And then I thought, well, what am I going to do with it? Where am I going to take it? And I decided to take it to cities where the huge demand, where people were coming into a city and the demand for sex for sale was high. So I took it to the Super Bowl. We started there. And I got volunteers from all over the country to come and label 10,000 bars of soap. And we gave it to the motels for free. And they took it. They took it and they said, we didn't know what to do. We see this all the time, and we didn't know what to do. At that time, I also met 2 young college students, and those guys said, Theresa, we really want to do this at one motel. The policemen tell us this is where the pimps are taking the girls. And I said, I don't know. And he said, please, we'll give it to them for the whole month. I'm like, okay. And so I gave them soap for 2 months. I tapped into my life savings, supplied them with all the soap they needed for this one motel. It was a suburban extended stay motel outside of Dallas. And that was in April. In May, a phone call came. A young lady, 21 years old, had been kidnapped from Milwaukee by a couple. She had been driven to New Orleans, and she had been forced to work as a stripper and a prostitute. Their next stop was Dallas. They took her to this extended suburban stay and locked her in the bathroom and made her take a bath of cold water. She pounded on the door and begged to get out and go for a walk for a few minutes. They let her, and with her she took a bar of soap, and she made a phone call. A tiny little bar of soap helped her find her voice and find freedom. This young lady is not so lucky. We decided that we are going to take this soap to every event that we can imagine. We're taking it this year to the Detroit Auto Show, to the Super Bowl, to the Daytona Bike Week, to the National Democrat and Republican conventions. We're taking it everywhere the demand for sex is higher. And guess what? That includes Columbus, Ohio. This young lady is for sale in Columbus, Ohio, right this very minute. I found her ad when I was looking up the Columbus Marathon. It says on here she's 22. Does anybody in this room think she's 22? No? She looks like 12 to me. She's from Columbus, and she's for sale right now. I do this for her because I don't want her to have to go through what I endured all those years. I'm sorry. So this story is a story of hope, of how a house, just a simple house, can heal. It's a story of how a bar of soap can rescue. And it's a story of how I found my voice, and now you know. Thank you.